Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, episode 646. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about amusement parks, luxury hotels, and the Louvre, mosques, museums, and camel races as we go to the United Arab Emirates. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about the UAE. I'd like to welcome the show Keri Hedrick from OurGlobetrotters.com and also FamilyTravel-MiddleEast.com, who is coming to us both from the UAE and also come to talk to us about the United Arab Emirates. Keri, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks very much for having me, Chris.
And we actually probably ought to start by putting this on the map. When we say the UAE, what are we talking about?
Sure. So UAE is short for United Arab Emirates, which is right in the middle of the Gulf, so part of the Middle East.
And when you say the Gulf, we're talking about the Gulf of Arabia.
It's called the Arabian Gulf if you live in the UAE, but others might know it as the Persian Gulf.
Oh, the Persian Gulf, yeah. I was trying not to call it the Persian Gulf because I knew we were talking about that side, but yes, same place. Okay.
Google Maps apparently calls it the Arabian Gulf now. So.
Oh, do they? Oh, that's interesting. I did not realize that. Okay, and excellent. Why should someone go to the UAE?
Right. Well, we have actually lived in the United Arab Emirates over 6 years. So I've had the pleasure of being able to explore the country in some great detail. But I think what people will love the most is that it's a country that really blends tradition and culture in a way that you won't really see anywhere else in the world. It's an incredibly young country. It's still less than 50 years old since it was founded as a united country, but it's come an incredibly long way in that time. So you can be sunbathing in your modern hotel through to sleeping in a Bedouin tent all under one country.
And what kind of itinerary would you recommend?
Okay, well, a lot of people will only come into the country and stop in Dubai. They might do a night or two in Dubai, come away having seen a lot of skyscrapers, perhaps gone on a desert safari, and they're on their way. there is so much more to the country, and that's what I'd really like to talk to you about today, is all the bits outside of Dubai and maybe away from the flashy lights that people could go and explore.
And you mentioned the different bits, and we actually didn't mention the different bits that make up the UAE. So Dubai being one of the places that people are familiar with, and what else is in the UAE?
The UAE is actually made up of 7 emirates. So the largest one by far is the Abu Dhabi Emirate, and then Abu Dhabi City, which is the capital. And then Dubai is the one that most people are familiar with due to the fact that Emirates flies so many planes through Dubai. It is the biggest city, but not the biggest emirate. And then once you go beyond Dubai, you have a city called Sharjah, which is also a reasonably sized emirate. And then you head up to what they call the Northern Emirates, which are Ajman, Al Quwain, Ras Al Khaimah, and on the east coast, on the Gulf of Oman, you'll find Fujairah.
And I think you just got to places that people have, in large part, never heard of.
Until in recent years. A few years ago, I certainly couldn't have named you even the Northern Emirates living here, but they have definitely developed a lot up into the Northern Emirates now, a lot more beach resorts and trying to get themselves on the tourism map as much as Dubai. So, yeah, we will definitely touch on what you can do in those Northern Emirates.
Excellent. Well, let's get started then. Where are we going to start?
Fabulous. I think traditionally most people tend to start their trip in Dubai just because of the size of the airport there. Most people are probably familiar with some of the big buildings like Burj Khalifa, the Dubai Mall, but there's been quite a few things open in the last couple of years that people might not be familiar with. So I'm going to focus more on the newer buildings and newer things that happen around town, as well as some of the old favourites. What you do is going to depend a little bit on time of year. So before I jump straight into everything you can do, I guess you've got to take into account the fact that you are in the middle of the Middle East here. So you're going to experience desert temperatures.
Right.
So when we say desert temperatures, and I meant to bring my little conversion chart for you, where you're talking upwards of 50 Celsius.
Oh my,
which
okay.
Fahrenheit, I think you're talking sort of in your 110s to 120s, I think.
Exactly.
So it gets incredibly hot in the peak of summer. As an expat, I can tell you I leave most summers myself because it's simply too hot. But that said, there is a lot more indoor things these days that tourists can still see. So I wouldn't write off visiting Dubai or the UAE completely in July, August, but it is immensely hot. Don't get any visions of yourself lying on the beach. The sand is just so scorching, you'll burn your feet even with your shoes on. So
wow,
that
okay.
kind of temperature, yeah.
So what is the best time to go, winter then? Or
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll flip the calendar over. So the best time of year, from about late October onwards, the temperature and the humidity drop significantly. So for mid-October through to normally about the end of April, it will be the end of your beach season. Once you're getting into May, June, it's starting to get really hot.
I should point out we've done an episode on the UAE relatively recently, within the last 3 years, but we're going to head a little different direction this time. So if this starts to sound familiar, you're thinking, hey, we covered this before, we have, but there are other things to cover. So.
And the other timing issue, just to point out as well, is around the holy month of Ramadan, which changes
moves
every
around.
year.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we've now moved off it being in the peak of summer.
Mm-hmm.
It will now fall, I believe this year starts 5th of May and through to early June. And the only reason to point that out is that business hours can be quite different, and there's a slightly different standard of behaviour expected from tourists during this time.
Sure.
Having said that, even over the years we've lived here, it's loosened up a lot. I guess there's a great appreciation that there's a lot of tourists in town, so you can still get food during the day just in covered areas, but still the dress behaviour and standard needs to adjust during that time.
Right. We should just say, when you say it needs to adjust, so be aware that there's a lot of people going hungry during the daylight hours during that time period.
Correct.
When they also might be just a little more grumpy, in my experience, because you would be too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's
so
also
it isn't a time to be walking around with food outside. Yeah.
Eating food is actually illegal.
Yep.
So if you are seen eating food in public, that's illegal. And also because it's a time for religious reflection, things like public displays of affection, showing too much skin, it's all just taken a little more seriously during the Ramadan period.
Sure, yeah.
Right, so that said, a lot of the itinerary sort of suggestions and the seasonal things that we really enjoy are best done in the winter months, but yeah, don't discount visiting in the summer. So let's get on to some of the new openings around Dubai. So one of the great new things is the Dubai Frame. This has opened up in Sabel Park. It is positioned just on the edge, I guess, of modern Dubai city. So you climb up. It is when I say Dubai frame, it is literally a giant picture frame.
Okay.
Which I think it's 46 stories tall. So you take a lift up to the top of this picture frame, and looking out one side of it, you can see the modern city of Dubai. You look down to downtown, Burj Khalifa, all the modern building. And out the other side, you look over to Deira, which is part of the old bit of Dubai Creek, and then onwards onto Sharjah at the other side. So it's a really good, fun new place to visit. It's also got a dancing water fountain show like you would see at Dubai Mall. So that's a good new recommendation for tourists.
It's a large picture frame.
Yeah.
I just feel like I've never really seen anything that is more Instagrammable than a great big picture frame.
I'll tell you, it's really difficult to get. You need to use like a GoPro with a wide angle lens to fit it in. But
okay.
So much of Dubai, I guess modern Dubai, is set up to be an Instagrammable moment. So that's what I would say a lot about it. A lot of the new waterfront developments. So Dubai being based on the waterfront along the Gulf there, they've really taken advantage of that. In fact, the city is very spread along the waterfront. So when we talk about kind of the old bits of Dubai, it kind of starts at Deira and Burj and then works its way through downtown, through to Jumeirah, the giant palm most people are probably familiar with, and then through some of the newer beach areas, all the way almost through to the border with Abu Dhabi now.
And the giant palm, is that the island in the shape of a giant palm? Are we talking about that one?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, that one. That's the first one. That's Palm Jumeirah.
And the Burj Khalifa that you mentioned, the tallest building in the world.
Tallest building in the world. Yeah.
Or still the tallest building in the world? It is
at the moment.
Okay.
It
it changes so rapidly that I...
And there's another bigger palm in Jebel Ali, but the construction work hasn't completed there yet. So yeah, Palm Jumeirah is still the largest inhabited artificial archipelago.
Okay.
Some people might be familiar with like the Atlantis hotels. It's very similar to the one on the Palm. Sorry, in the Bahamas. It sits at the end of the Palm. Okay. It has a massive water park. So that's been there for quite a few years. What is new out on the Palm is they've now got a boardwalk that runs all the way around the outer prong of the Palm. So that's a good new evening spot. Other good evening spots that have opened up now is at Lemur Beach, which is one of the old beachfronts that they've really done up and, added food vans and changed facilities and that sort of thing. And then along Dubai Creek, which is known as the traditional older area of Dubai, they've now got the Al Saif waterfront, which is it's new but been done to look like it was in the old style of building. Okay. So that's a nice new touristy area. It's still quite quiet because it's new, but I can see that really picking up as a good new tourist area. As I said, there's still loads to do in Dubai. If you're theme park fans, there's 2 giant theme park complexes there now, IMG World of Adventures and Dubai Parks and Resorts, which includes a Legoland, Motion Gate and a Bollywood theme park. So that's great for your family travellers, particularly will enjoy those. But yeah, the city just keeps expanding and expanding. So you could easily spend a week and not get bored staying in Dubai itself. Okay. But there is definitely more beyond Dubai. So I'd love to jump into more around the country.
Please do. And again, we've got a couple different episodes that touch on Dubai as well. So go back and look at those if you're looking for more information about Dubai itself. But you wanted to take us elsewhere.
Yeah, let's jump down to Abu Dhabi. I think everyone probably knows the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque, one of the biggest and most beautiful mosques in the world. We're very lucky that it's right on our doorstep, so I drive past it several times a day and can't help but stop and marvel at it every time. It has been open for a few years now, but what is new is across the road from the mosque, you now have Wayat al-Karama, which is a war memorial. But if you've ever seen those beautiful pictures of the mosque, which are over sort of a watery pond and reflection, that's been taken from Wayat al-Karama across the road. So it's a lovely new place that I recommend people build time into their itinerary to head over there as well. One of the great new cultural openings in Abu Dhabi in the last just over 12 months ago was the Louvre. Mm-hmm. It took many, many years longer than they expected for it to open, but it has finally opened, and it is truly spectacular. And it's not extensive in terms of a museum, but it's certainly beautiful, like architecturally beautiful and all really well set out. I would add that to your must-do list now for Abu Dhabi on Saadiyat Island. There are other museums due to open as part of that project, but they have definitely been delayed for several more years. We won't see those opening in the near future.
And there are additional art museums as part of that project?
That's correct, yes. So the branch of the Guggenheim is due to open as well.
Oh, right. I remember that.
And there's also, I believe it's a Sheikh Zayed history museum for the country. But these have all been significantly delayed over the last few years. So we will look forward to those projects coming, but it's looking spectacular when you head out to the island now, but yeah, still very much under construction.
Okay.
So that's on as I said, on a bit called Saadiyat Island. One of the other islands, so I probably best describe the geography of how Abu Dhabi works. So there's a big, long, straight freeway that takes you between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. You can get from end to end of the city in just about an hour. But to get into the hearts of the city obviously takes longer with traffic. Abu Dhabi itself sits on an island, and then on the outskirts of that you have the largest ones are Saadiyat Island and then Yas Island. Yas Island has grown in popularity over the years. A few years ago, the Grand Prix moved to Abu Dhabi. So in late November each year, you can catch the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix at the Yas Marina circuit. And there's also a number of theme parks that have opened on Yas Island as well. People might be familiar with Ferrari World. Mm-hmm. Also, Yas Water World, which has several times over won the Best Water Park in the World award. And in the past 6 months, we've had a Warner Brothers World open in Abu Dhabi as well. So, again, some great new family additions. So, I always recommend to families coming in that they might want to base themselves on Yas Island if they're coming into Abu Dhabi.
Okay. And
it's also ultra convenient to the airport too. We're still waiting on the new Abu Dhabi airport to open. It should be hopefully imminently this year. But Yas Island's only minutes away from both the new and the old airport, so it's a great place to base yourself during a stopover.
Excellent. Where to next?
A couple more things in Abu Dhabi that are old but new. So they've had a huge push of late trying to restore some of the older buildings in Abu Dhabi. Qasr Al Hossain's one of the original forts, original buildings on the Abu Dhabi waterfront. They very recently have reopened that building, which is beautiful. There's always been the Emirates Heritage Village, but I think it's quite small compared to some of the other buildings. The brand new presidential palace has opened in the last couple of years as well, but you can't get very close to that. It's heavily secured. But you may have heard of Emirates Palace, the hotel called Emirates Palace.
I don't think I have.
No, okay. It's one of the most expensive hotels to ever be opened in the world. It's very glamorous. I don't know if you've ever seen Fast and Furious 7, the movie.
I have not.
All the culture buffs out there that have seen Fast and Furious, a lot of it is set in Abu Dhabi around this very expensive, beautiful, elaborate Emirates Palace hotel. And there's also a great chase scene in this building called Etihad Towers across the road, where the cars go flying through the sky between skyscrapers, as you do.
As you do.
And that's all set down this little part of Abu Dhabi, which has got some incredibly posh buildings, including the new presidential palace. So my top tip to people is to head to there's an observation floor in Etihad Towers, and you can get above all of this and see all around, see around to the marinas below, watch all the expensive yachts coming in. That's good fun.
Okay.
Or if you'd rather not pay for the observation deck, there's Ray's Bar that gets the same view that you come up for a drink for and get the same view from up there.
Excellent.
So that kind of finishes off in Abu Dhabi. There's loads more still, obviously, but that's kind of the highlights of what's new in Abu Dhabi. We then need to head down the road to Al Ain. So Al Ain is one of the more historical towns in Abu Dhabi. It's where the country's founding father, Sheikh Zayed, is from. So he was an Al Ain resident, but we're still talking, he was only born in 1918. So the country itself is still very young. And even at that time, they were still very much in a kind of a tribal village type country. So in Al Ain, there's a lot of historical palaces and places where you can learn a bit more about the country's history. But actually, one of the most exciting new places in Al Ain is actually inside the Al Ain Zoo. They have opened up a new, cultural understanding building, and it probably has one of the best displays that I've seen in terms of history of the country, history of the Bedouin people, history of the geography, the animals. So although there's lots of great stuff in both Abu Dhabi and Dubai, I think Al Ain's actually got the better, more comprehensive displays and learning if you want to learn more about the country itself.
Okay.
Also in Al Ain, at the moment they're renovating the National Museum. So in the National Museum is where they had a lot of the kind of heritage pieces going back many, many centuries. That's been closed for renovations at the moment. Undetermined time when it will reopen, but that's common for out here. But you can still go out to Hilly Archaeological Park, is where you will see a lot of the old artefacts in the country, so that they believe some of the remains they found date back over 5,000 years. So although the country itself is only 50 years old, it's definitely been inhabited. The lands have been inhabited for much longer.
Interesting. So, and you say closed for an undetermined period of time, but we're expecting that to be more like years than months.
Yeah, that's normally when you ask and you're given an inshallah, then yeah, you can probably double the amount of time you've been told.
And when you're given, and you just used a phrase that I'm less familiar with because I haven't lived in the UAE, but you're given the phrase is as Allah wills.
Yeah, and inshallah, it basically translates to God willing. So it means it should open in 2 years, God willing.
God willing, yes.
So it's an expression you would definitely become familiar with when you're out here.
I remember we talked about this on a previous episode that somebody ordered something at a restaurant, and the response they got back, oddly enough, was, yes, we have that. Basically, inshallah, as God wills. It's we have that or we don't have that. It will open or it won't open.
The tourists hopefully don't get it as bad as we do living here, but certainly living here, where we get it a lot. I'll come next Tuesday to fix it, inshallah. Yeah, so as I say, several museums now in LA that have opened other than just what was the former founder's family home. There's also, I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, but it's Casa Al Mawaji. And this is our current ruler's birth home. So Sheikh Khalifa, who is our current ruler of the United Arab Emirates.
Okay.
I guess his whole homestead has been turned into an historical display as well, talking a bit more about the recent history of the country. And in LA, there's also a mountain, which surprises a lot of people. So you'll find when we talk about the Northern Emirates, there's a lot more mountainous country in the Northern Emirates. But in Abu Dhabi, there's this one jutting up piece of rock called Jebel Hafid, which you can drive to the top to and look at the views. So from one side, you'll get the view back to Al Ain, and from the other over to Oman, because you're right on the Omani border there.
Okay.
The other thing I should mention, when you're in Abu Dhabi Emirate, is, of course, the largest bit of desert in the world, the Empty Quarter. So I thoroughly recommend anyone while they're in the country, I wouldn't just head to an overnight desert safari. If you're going to be here for a decent number of days, go and actually stay overnight properly in either one of the resorts or one of the desert style camps where you can go and enjoy the desert. You can obviously partake in things like dune bashing, which is where they take the four-wheel drives out over the sand, or if you prefer something more sedate, you can take camel rides or they do quad biking. You can do sandboarding, fat biking, any way you like to get through the sand. They'll have loads of outdoor activities, and then enjoy a traditional Bedouin dinner under the stars. So should always be kind of top of a visitor's list.
Are there particular outfitters you would recommend going with if we're doing the camps, or a particular resort you would recommend if we're doing the more permanent?
It kind of changes all the time. So certainly in terms of resorts, one of the best you'll find, I would argue, any desert resort in the world is Casa Al Sarab. Just on the way to the Empty Quarter. It is one of the most stunningly beautiful, picturesque resorts you could imagine.
Okay.
Slightly closer into Abu Dhabi, which makes it quite good for people who just want to do overnight trips, is Arabian Nights Village.
Okay.
Which is only about 40 minutes outside of the city, but you've got the option again to sleep in some of their luxury glamping type huts there, or you can do it as an evening trip out from Abu Dhabi. And for those who are maybe only Dubai based and not making it as far, then a company that's highly recommended there is Platinum Heritage. They take much more of a desert conservation view and teaching you more about the actual desert environment and the animals and the plants, rather than focus on the dune bashing sports.
Okay. Got it. More about seeing the landscape than riding over it at fast speed.
That's right. They do it in open top vintage Land Rovers. So it's a little more pricey than some of the other dune bashing type companies, but well worth it.
Okay.
So that kind of ends our tour on the Abu Dhabi side of things. The issue with the way the geography of the country kind of works. So Al Ain is literally halfway between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. It takes the same amount of time to drive. But to get up to the Northern Emirates, you pretty much have to drive back up through Dubai Emirate to get up to the Emirates that sit above it. But there are loads of different freeways now. But depending on time of day you go, you shouldn't get too stuck in traffic.
Konnichiwa, I'm Yuki, a tour leader with Explore. Who knew that hidden among Tokyo's towering skyscrapers was a peaceful tea house surrounded by ancient trees and serene ponds? Actually, I knew. It was my mother's secret sanctuary. Not everyone knows about Tokyo's Hamarikyu Gardens. Arigatou gozaimasu. But you will if you explore. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel, explore.
Will, talk to me.
ABC Tuesday.
They took his daughter. She's coming home alive.
Will Trent, the series critics are calling powerful must-see TV, continues to thrill.
Shouldn't we strategize before we go in there?
If we screw up this case, a cop killer walks free.
With the riveting conclusion to a 2-part season premiere.
GBI!
Help me!
Get down!
Will Trent, all new Tuesday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Heading up to Sharjah. Sharjah is best known as the capital of culture for the United Arab Emirates. They have a lot of museums, art galleries, festival of literature, that sort of thing all happen in the Sharjah Emirate. It's not one I'm as familiar with. And compared to all the other Emirates, it's probably the most conservative as well. It's the only one that has a no alcohol law. And they're just slightly stricter on all their rules within Sharjah.
Okay.
But other than the drinking thing, I think most tourists probably wouldn't see too much of a difference if they were doing a day trip or staying overnight there.
Good to know. Okay.
I think Ajman's actually the smallest of all the Emirates. It's really just a small chunk of land that's carved out. I think it's about 16 kilometres along the coast. Like many of the other Emirates, you probably won't even notice that you're driving through it. It will just be a continuation of the high rises along the water. They've got a number of luxury hotels have opened there, and they've also got a museum which is supposed to be quite cool, but I'll admit I've driven past a few times and I actually stuck my head in Ajman. The other thing they're doing in Ajman, I know they've got the nature reserve projects they're working on, so working on more of trying to preserve some of the wetlands and making that into more of a tourist attraction.
Okay.
As we head beyond Ajman, you come to Al Quwain, which I guess compared to the glitz and the glamour of some of the other Emirates, Al Quwain is unique is the best way I can put it. It doesn't have the high rises that many of the other cities do.
Okay.
It's very much more low rise, very much more industrial. I can only assume it's not as rich as the other Emirates. Not as much money has been put into it. It's probably most famous here because it's got their cheapest alcohol shop and it's got a big water park. So that's what most of the expats here would know it for. Otherwise, most tourists probably it wouldn't come up on their radar other than driving through it on their way to Ras Al Khaimah. That said, I'm sure these things could change. If we chatted again in a few years, I'm sure they'd have their own big resort and tourist attractions as well.
And when you say industrial, I'm not picturing that anywhere in the UAE there is big industry factories and smokestacks.
Yeah, this is probably what will really shock a lot of people because they tend to become and be based in the big cities themselves.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually an amazing amount of industry in this country, huge number of trucks, industrial estate. I guess if you think about the amount of construction that goes on, there has to be the things that go behind that, just so the truck repair workshops and the concrete factories and everything else. So there's actually enormous amounts of the country are actually quite industrial, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, bits the tourists tend to skirt past, but you do see it a lot. Particularly the trucks. I think if you're driving anywhere outside of the cities, you'll see massive trucks everywhere. Constant stream of them kind of running across the country and up through to Saudi Arabia.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that definitely, I had to clarify that because it was so different from my expectations. But
for a tourist, it's got an extreme contrast to being somewhere like Dubai, which is, might be concretey, but in a glitz and glamoury way. This is very much more desertscape. We had to stop in the middle of the road for camels. First time we drove up there, literally camels just walking across the road in Al Quwain. So it was an interesting experience, our first visit. We've gotten a bit used to the fact it's a bit of the ugly duckling now, but as I said, I'm sure it will catch up with the others. Mm-hmm. Which takes us through to Ras Al Khaimah. So Ras Al Khaimah, of all the other Emirates, is probably the one that's going to try and challenge Dubai next in terms of size and beautiful beach resorts and what it can offer for the tourist market. So Ras Al Khaimah, you're heading, if you can imagine the country kind of spread across the coast. It's the one most easterly of the northern Emirates. So it's heading almost up to that northern tip. There you'll find it gets quite mountainous. So as you head through the country, you start heading into the mountain range there. And the highest point in the country, Jebel Jais. They have recently launched the longest zip line in the world. You can go through the mountains and take the zip line. But they also have, it's probably in the same sort of size and scale as the Palm in Jumeirah, so an artificial islands that have been built called Marjan Island, which they're slowly building up with resorts all along that strip there. So it's become a very popular, particularly with charter customers coming in from Europe and from Russia. People can fly directly into Ras Al Khaimah airport and come straight to these beach resorts, never have to actually touch Dubai.
Okay.
So that's kind of a newish development since the years that we've lived here. That's certainly come on.
So in the last 4 years, you say, because you've been there for 4 years, this has been up?
6 years. Yeah. So when we first went up, there was a few resorts, but certainly it's full of resorts along that coastline now. Yeah, and some of the older ones that were there have been bought over by bigger chains and done up. So it's become very popular. Not only the beach resorts, but a lot of people are getting into the glamping now as well. So setting up posh camping tents for families along the beach fronts and party games and that sort of thing.
I'm curious, since you bring it up here, what else have you seen, stepping back a little bit, over the whole 6 years you've been there? What are the other changes, besides the individual things like the Louvre opening and those sort of additional museums, buildings, and things like that. Culturally, are you seeing changes in the UAE, or is it still the country you moved to?
I think it's a recognition that tourists want more. Tourists don't just want shiny big buildings. They want to experience the country more. So I think there's very much a focus more on bringing their culture and their heritage out.
Oh, interesting.
Because I think you've covered this in past interviews. Most people, when they come to the UAE, might not even have an interaction other than with the customs guy, with an Emirati the whole time they're in the country.
Right.
Yeah. They're very likely to meet a service person who is probably going to be of Filipino or South Asian origin rather than an actual Emirati. So I think there's a recognition that this isn't necessarily the image they want to be giving the rest of the world. So there's been a huge amount of time and money poured into heritage projects. So these things, bringing some of these old buildings up, making them a more prominent part of the culture. Yeah, generally seeing tourism in a slightly different angle. They still obviously want the tourism dollar, but they're trying to diversify away from that as well. So,
well, and the other thing that brings up is, what percentage do you happen to know off the top of your head of people who are living currently in the UAE are actually Emiratis, or actually from there?
There's different numbers touted, but it's anywhere between about 12 to 14% of the population is actually native Emirati. So the vast majority would be overseas workers, with the majority of them being Indian, Bangladesh, Pakistani, Southern Asian, and a lot of other Arab nations. So if you're thinking about sort of white Western expats that like we are, we're probably about the same percentage as Emiratis, probably under 15% of the population.
Interesting. And I'm guessing the vast majority of the people who are from Western countries who are there are somehow connected to oil.
A lot of other industries. So there'd be people involved.
I thought I would at least address my preconceived notions.
They might be involved in other types of energy, so not just oil, but other types of energy, so things like nuclear energy.
Okay.
Also, finance is huge now out here. A lot of people in finance, hospitality, obviously being another large sector.
Well, that makes sense.
Certainly amongst the expats, we know that they're across a huge range of industries out here now, which is, again, probably maybe not from 6 years ago, but I first came through the country in 2004, so that's where kind of my first impressions are based on. And it has vastly changed in terms of suddenly everything is high rise rather than low rise, and a lot more shine. There's a lot more obvious money.
Okay. Well, you sorry, I interrupted you, and you were heading us up the peninsula here.
So heading back to Ras Al Khaimah here, there's a lot of beautiful, you'll notice the colours of the sand actually change as well. So again, if you only base yourselves in the city, you'll probably see a lot of very yellow sand. The further and further into the desert you go, the sand turns much, much redder. So as you go into Ras Al Khaimah, beautiful red sands and a lot of, again, nice kind of desert camps. One out there that's highly acclaimed is the Ritz Al Wadi. It's another one of these beautiful oasis-type desert camps out that direction.
Okay.
And another place that I have always been meaning to stop at, and again, I never had, is it's called Jazira Al Hamra, and it's an abandoned ghost town.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're looking for something different, again, no one quite knows why the town was abandoned, but yeah, you can see an old kind of Bedouin village in Ras Al Khaimah.
And abandoned from how long ago?
I think about a century.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
There is another one just outside of Dubai as well, but its name's escaping me at the moment. But yeah, there's a few places that, obviously over the years they've been covered over by sand and time is forgotten. So from Ras Al Khaimah, your next step then is to head over to Fujairah. So Fujairah basically covers almost everywhere down the eastern coast of the country. Fujairah is best known for people come here to do scuba diving and get out in the water. So again, you're kind of just over the mountain range here. So the mountains that go up they start all the way down in Oman, go all the way up the length of UAE up to the Strait of Hormuz. So yeah, other side of that is Fujairah. And again, it used to only be a couple of beach resorts. Now there's a lot of beach resorts along this strip. Fujairah city centre has a large mosque, in fact a huge mosque also called Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque. And there's a number of old forts, and there's also, I believe it's one of the reported oldest mosques in the world you can find there as well, a very tiny building on the east coast.
And in terms of visiting a mosque in the UAE, been to numerous mosques in Muslim countries, obviously appropriate dress, just like you would in a cathedral in Europe, being covered, women with their head covered with a scarf. Anything else we need to know generally available for tourists to visit? other than of times of prayer?
The main one is Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque, and there they will, because they get so many tourists, they will actually issue ladies particularly with an abaya, or they can issue men with a kandura, which is the long white cloak. You do try and avoid during prayer times. It's slightly different setup at the Grand Mosque. And there's quite often men's and women's side, so you just need to be careful if you are going into one, that obviously women are going into the right side of the mosque.
Okay.
But we've been to mosques in other countries where if it's open to tourism, they tend to have quite obvious signs where you are and aren't allowed to walk into.
Right. Okay. Well, and we had the same thing in India, in Delhi, for instance, where we went in the large mosque there, and all the women were issued. The name of the garment again is
It's an abaya, the one that goes the whole length of your body.
Right, exactly.
Abaya.
Which is nice, because then you just don't have to worry quite as much about which
has a bit of fun with it, actually.
Oh, yeah. We had a lot of pictures taken with the ladies in their multicolored abayas in that case.
Absolutely. And as long as you are posing appropriately, then you won't get in trouble for it. They obviously just don't like big group shots or showing off in front of the mosque. That's not appreciated.
Right.
So, just remembering your decorum.
Yep. Okay.
So that kind of takes us on a tour around the country. There are a few little quirks and anomalies once you start getting really far over to the eastern side of the country. There's several Omani enclaves. So when the country was originally carved up a number of years ago, back in the early 70s, where they were working out how everything would be divided, there were a couple of, I guess, tribes that wanted to stay with Oman rather than go with either Fujairah or the Sharjah sheikhs. So there's little bits of land that you can actually drive through, which are actually little bits of Oman rather than being bits of Fujairah. You might be familiar with the fact that there's a whole enclave in the very top corner called Mazandam.
Yep.
So everyone knows about that one, but there's actually a couple of smaller ones when you head further south. I think Mada is the name, Mada, and then there's another UAE enclave inside that enclave.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it before. As I zoom in on my map, I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, if you zoom in on a map, you can actually see the little separate kind of international borders that go around these little clumps, and they're literally just little villages, just small villages on a map. If you have a four-wheel drive, you can explore further around these little villages. They're very much in the sort of mountainous regions where you need a four-wheel drive.
And in terms of four-wheel drive, would you recommend people, if they're going to drive in the UAE, that it's no problem to just rent a four-wheel drive and drive anywhere? Any specific instructions, or get a driver, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, probably not on their own. Unless you've had experience doing sand four-wheel driving, it's not something I'd recommend on your own.
Yeah.
I can't tell you top of my head, but there are groups that you can join that would do organised tours. So if you are an experienced four-wheel driver and want to get out and see it in a bit more detail, you can definitely join in with like group excursions on weekends.
Okay.
There'll be a convoy of 20 vehicles or something going out, and you can join in with that. We tend to go with friends, so we'll go down to either bits of beachfront, or you can go not too far off the road. You can climb over the dunes, as long as you've got others with you. So for obvious reasons, if you get stuck, you've got some support crew with you. But yeah, it's a very popular pastime when people are living here. The other disadvantage, I guess, as a tourist, is that you don't have all your gear with you.
Right,
so that's why it's better probably to go with an organised camp, because you simply don't have all your camping stuff with you when you're visiting as a tourist. But you could certainly head out on a day trip and get to some of these more extreme places by going with a group.
What surprised you about the UAE when you first moved there?
This might sound silly, but how normal it is. Like, we live what I would call a very normal life.
It really doesn't, because I think that for people who have traveled to a lot of countries, that is one of the first things you start to realize, is that everywhere in the world, people get up in the morning and they have breakfast and they get their kids ready for school, and there are a lot of things that are really make us similar rather than different. Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. So I think that's probably been the most striking thing over the years that I've lived here, is it's a very multicultural country because of the reason we said that there's so many expats living here. So you do live in completely mixed communities. So there's no big gated communities and compounds and that sort of thing. It's not like that. We do all live mixed in together. Locals are just as likely to be your neighbour as any other working person. There's slight divides, obviously, by income and class here. So people who are labourers probably live in different accommodation to people who are office workers. So that's the only real divide. From a tourist point of view, I would say don't be afraid that you're going to be suddenly immersed in a culture that you don't understand. It is incredibly westernised in the big cities. Everything will be in English. So,
any warnings you would give to somebody who's traveling there?
Anyone who's not been to a Muslim country before, obviously there's just a little bit more to be conscious of in terms of your manners, like no swearing, no rude gestures, no drunken and loud behaviour. that just wouldn't be socially acceptable here and can land you in trouble with the police. And also just probably being slightly more covered as well. So even though it's well known for its beach resorts, once you leave a beach resort, you should really be covering your body up. Not that a lot of tourists heed by this these days, but yeah, definitely as a sign of respect, you should just be a bit more covered than you normally would when you're out in public.
Well, and I would go as far as to say, I actually, as a rule, don't tend to drink in Muslim countries, just even if alcohol is available. If you're looking for a outing where you want to go drinking someplace, that's probably just not the right choice.
It's hard because they kind of set it up for it as well, though.
Yeah.
So they do set up these fancy hotels and advertise
Absolutely,
their ladies'
yeah.
nights and come for this. Particularly a lot of like beach party islands that they advertise now, so small islands that have been set up just for partying.
Right.
And that does bring the wrong sorts of behaviour with it, and the Instagram culture as well of people doing pouty selfies and amazing photos. So yeah. I think that is a challenge for the country to try and overcome still. How far do you push that westernisation and things that you accept without damaging and offending your own culture? That will take a little bit of time still for it to sort itself out where the perfect balance is.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's a personal choice for me. I'm not saying that nobody should be drinking in Muslim countries, but it's just something to be thinking about. If that's the kind of vacation you're looking for, one, we're probably the wrong podcast for you. We're probably not going to take you to the right places either. But when I think of the UAE, we think of sort of one extreme, the westernmost facing being maybe Dubai, and very modern and things like that. If you think of the opposite of that, when you felt like you were most back in time or most connected to the Emirati culture itself, where would you be?
This is going to be really odd. We took a test car out into the desert one day and tried to turn around on the side of the road and got ourselves stuck.
Okay.
Basically pretty far from anywhere. And we were suddenly doing, we normally have a big four-wheel drive with all the camping and survival gear. We didn't have any of that with us and thought, oh Lord, how far back to the nearest service station? We're going to be stuck here for hours. And this wonderful Emirati person pulled over and without even stopping for a second, he said, oh, you need to do this with your tyres. And okay. And before we could stop, he was out there deflating all our tyres, running the car backwards and forwards. 2 other trucks stopped and asked if we needed any help. They had their falcons in the back, asked if the children wanted to see their falcons. And I'm sure they invited us back for tea as well. And we were just embarrassed with their hospitality and their generosity. Yeah, it doesn't take long to be outside of the city and seeing these genuine Emirati people who they really are quite different, I think, to city people.
I love the fact that you just glossed over and they had their falcons in the back.
Oh, yeah. As you do.
As you do.
Yeah, they wanted the kids to see the falcons. So, yeah, it was one of those incredible connecting moments to know that these are incredibly hospitable. Yeah. They always want to welcome you and they will always try and invite you in for tea and coffee and that sort of thing. So they might seem very closed and I guess not welcoming to the average tourist because they don't see it, but they're actually very warm and welcoming people.
And getting back to the falcons, so it is a traditional part of the Emirati culture to have hunting
very much
falcons?
Part of the traditional Emirati culture. And I glossed over that when we talked about Abu Dhabi. One of the brilliant things to see in Abu Dhabi is the Falcon Hospital. Again, it's just on the outskirts. In fact, it's not far at all from Abu Dhabi International Airport, so it's something you can do on a stopover. Is go down for one of the Falcon tours and they will take you through the whole history of Falcons. They will explain things like how Falcon passports work. They will take you to their aviaries. They will take you through actual procedures in the hospital. It's probably one of the best tourist attractions in the city, actually, to really get an understanding of that side of their culture.
Falcon passports in terms of being able to import falcons from other countries.
Okay. Yeah, because they'll take them to competitions in other countries as well, and they'll sit with them in first class, literally sit with them in first class, but they do need their own passport to travel.
Okay, well that's...
You don't believe it till you see it. So they've actually, we've seen a real life Falcon passport.
Huh. All right. Well, that is something that I have not ever... Well, I don't sit in first class very often, I'd have to say. If I'm sitting in first class, somebody else paid for it, let's be honest. But
now, while we're touching on falcons, actually, that reminds me of one thing we didn't touch on, which is the Al Dafra Festival. Okay. Now, have you ever heard of a camel maizana?
No.
This is a camel beauty competition. This is held as part of the Al Dafra Festival in Abu Dhabi Western region. It's held the last couple of weeks of December every year. And if you are a tourist visiting for the first time, it is an absolute do not miss event. It is so much fun. It's one thing that's still entirely run in Arabic. Other than knowing where it is on a map, you can turn up in your car, but the whole event is mostly Emirati. It's a Bedouin cultural celebration, so it's mostly Emiratis. There is a bit of Saudi and sort of Omani influence in there as well. But yeah, the main event of this is the Camel Beauty Pageant. I think it's been running for 10, 11 years now. And I believe it started with a conversation about who's got the more beautiful camel. And now it's become quite the competitive sport. But when we say competitive, we're talking prizes running into the millions of dollars.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
So it's really quite something to see. It was, I guess, the closest I could equate it to is like the noise you get at an English football match, like just the crowds cheering and chanting for their favourite camel. They're all done up with the bling around their faces, and
that's so funny.
One of the most amazing experiences. And you can also experience. They do camel racing. They obviously do the falconry there. Saluki racing. Saluki are like the sort of greyhound-looking dogs. Goat milking, date packing. Anything you can imagine that's considered part of the traditional Emirati culture, you can see at the Al Dafra festival. So it's a must especially for those who have lived out here for some time and really want to get absorbed in the culture.
I've done a little bit of camel racing, but I think my camel racing days may be behind me. But the funny thing is, camels have such a bad reputation, and yet my wife, after riding a camel in Upper Egypt and having such a good-natured camel that was so used to tourists, for one thing, just is in love with camels. You know, if I tell her there's a camel ride in this particular trip, for instance, when we went to Morocco, she's all in. So
delighted. Oh, I must say, I have a new appreciation for what camels mean to the Bedouin people and their value, their importance in the region. And I know an awful lot about picking the beauty aspects of a camel, but in terms of actually riding them, I have limited desire. We actually just got back from Egypt and the kids were desperate to do where you ride the camels and have your photo taken with the pyramids behind you.
Right.
So it was under much duress I was taken to do that. One, as you say, they're grumpy, and two, they're actually really difficult to ride.
They are a little difficult to ride. They have a very unusual gait. The thing that's different about where we were riding them just off the Nile River in Upper Egypt into a Nubian village. And the walking was actually very difficult. The sand was quite fine, and we were walking uphill.
10 years ago, I did that same one. No, you must have been just on the other side of Aswan. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
I think that's where my hatred kind of started. Obviously, over the years, various school fates and desert trips, I've been forced on camels more times than I would like. And it's the up and down I think I hate the most, when they stand up and when they sit down at them.
Oh, yeah.
Quite terrifying.
It is easy to feel like you're going to fall off as the camel is getting up and getting down. Yeah, absolutely.
But if you haven't been to the Middle East before, you have to ride a camel, absolutely.
Excellent. What else do people need to know before they go to the UAE?
Go in with your eyes open. So don't go and base yourself in Dubai and then say it was all concrete, it was boring, we didn't do this or that. Really try and get the time to get out on the road and see some of these outer Emirates. If you are a culture and history buff, definitely Al Ain is somewhere you want to be basing yourself for a while. There's just so many different sides to the country. And you can get caught into having a very Western experience if you don't stretch yourself.
Excellent. And if you're standing in the prettiest spot in the UAE, where are you standing or what are you looking at?
Certainly, looking out over the new Emirates Palace is just stunning. So if you head up to the Etihad Tower and you look down from there over you, you've got Emirates Palace and the Presidential Palace and the marina underneath you. It's definitely shows you the modern side, but modern but built in very traditional style side of Abu Dhabi.
Okay. And if I was looking for the prettiest spot that is not modern, where would you take me?
Can I be really cheeky and mention somewhere that's technically not the UAE?
Okay.
Up into the Mazandam Peninsula, heading up there to Qasad. That is probably the most beautiful natural wonder part of the country, but technically you are actually over the border into Oman there.
Okay. All right. So something to see if we are in the area at least. And one thing that makes you laugh and say only in the UAE.
It's probably the word inshallah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And do you have a particularly good example of that?
It probably doesn't apply so much to tourism, but certainly when we were first trying to set up our house here, get electricity connected and that sort of thing. The number of times I heard that expression said to me, there's only so much a mum with a toddler and a newborn can handle. So it's the consistency of which I've heard the word over the years as well. You do learn to laugh when it happens at inconvenient moments.
Oh, yeah. And one thing that I forgot to ask when we were talking about warnings, are there things that tourists should not, it wouldn't be proper for us to bring up in conversation?
You should never say anything defamatory while you're in the country about the country.
Okay.
So it's very tight defamation laws. But otherwise, no, just watching your language. So you should never, certainly with any sort of authority, never use swear language. And in fact, to anybody, if you swear to anybody, they can take you to the police. So it's something that culturally some people struggle a little bit with. You need to mind what you're saying. As residents and expats, you've got to be a little bit more careful about some of the things that you say.
Okay.
But again, it's all down that defamation line of being very careful.
I think I'm probably okay with that, but some people might have to work a little harder at it, just depending on what you're used to saying at home.
Yeah, I guess it's used to. Certainly, there is a lot of freedom of speech here. There's a lot of tolerance for other cultures, other religions. But as soon as you speak out against the government themselves, then that's where the line is drawn.
Okay. Good to know. And then our guest again has been Keri Hedrick from ourglobetrotters.com or familytravel-middleeast.com. And Keri, if you had your best post to send us to about the UAE on either of the blogs, where would you send us?
Probably the top one is my 100 plus things to do in the UAE with kids. It has literally got over 100 ideas of different places and things that you can do in the UAE.
So what you're saying is this could have been a 3-hour episode.
It could have if I went through each one, but I'm not sure every single splash park and soft play would have been appropriate for this. But and the list is growing. It started at around 100, and I think it's got about 150 items on it now.
Excellent. Well, Keri, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for the UAE.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
In news of the community, I had 2 new reviews in Apple Podcasts. They disagreed with each other. The first one is a 5-star review, and it's from McLean91345, and it says, the best podcast for travel. Excellent podcast. I got a lot of good information for my trip to Scotland after listening to many of the episodes. I have a long list of places I want to go see. The other one, though, was a 1-star review, and it says, couldn't hear more than a minute. Literally turned off the podcast before a minute of playing. Sorry, but it just wasn't working for me. And I don't know if that one is more frustrating or less frustrating than the person who gave us a 1-star review after listening for 3 years and said it had no value. But it seems, I'm sorry that it didn't work out for you. I would encourage you, if you are listening to a show and you've only listened to a minute of it, it might not put you as an expert in terms of reviewing the show, let's just say. But, everyone is entitled to their opinion. I'd like to ask you a favor. I'm in between contracts right now, and Amateur Traveler doesn't really pay the bills. So if you're booking travel anyway, and you appreciate the Amateur Traveler, if you could go to one of the links on Amateur Traveler under Book Travel or under Deals, it will cost you no more money to book through that link, but will make some money for Amateur Traveler and help support the show. You can also go to shortcuts like amateurtraveler.com/Expedia, amateurtraveler.com/hotels.com, and those will redirect you to an affiliate link that will also support the show. If you can do that, I appreciate it. Thanks. With that, we're going to bring this show to an end. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening, especially for listening for more than a minute. Good for you.